Hello. In this brief video, we're going to talk about parentheses and official and informal notation. So we have parentheses in our language, and P or Q is not a sentence. Why? Well, because we know according to our third rule of our language, for the grammar, when you build a sentence using the conditional, you put the arrow in the middle, you put a sentence on each side, you put a parenthesis on the outside. This doesn't follow that rule, and our final rule says the only way to build a sentence is using those rules, and so this, because it doesn't follow any of the rules we have, is not a sentence, and it's because it's missing parentheses. But we've been treating this as if it is a sentence. So what's going on? Well, we use the parentheses at all because we need them to avoid what we call grammatical ambiguity. What's grammatical ambiguity? Well, the sentence, enraged cow injures farmer with axe. Well, so that's a sentence, but it can be read in two ways. One is that there's an enraged cow, and there's a farmer with the axe, and the enraged cow injured that farmer. The other is there's an enraged cow, and the enraged cow injured the farmer, and how did the cow do it? The cow used an axe. It's pretty obvious. So those are both perfectly fine sentences in the sense they each describe a possible situation, and then we can ask, is either true? Is that possible situation actual or not? And it's much more likely, if either of them happened, it's much more likely that the farmer had an axe and happened to be injured by the cow than that the cow used an axe to injure the farmer. But they're both fine sentences, or both fine they both are perfectly possible situations. The sentence is ambiguous because it could be used to express either of those two different thoughts. And it's grammatically ambiguous because the ambiguity, the reason it can be used to express two different thoughts, two different ideas, is not that any of the particular words are ambiguous, but how have they been put together to express a particular thought. And the question is, does with axe, does that attach to farmer, or does it attach to injures? And there's nothing about the sentence that tells us. It could be either. And so that's a grammatical ambiguity, and there are grammatical ambiguities that are closer to the kind of sentences that we're concerned about in this course, like this sentence, Bob bakes, or Sarah sings and Larry laughs. This could be an or sentence. It could be either Bob bakes or Sarah sings and Larry laughs. That's one way to read it. A different way is to read it as a conjunction and, where we say it's both the case that Bob bakes or Sarah sings, and also that Larry laughs. And these don't say the same thing. They're different ideas, different thoughts. The conjunction one, for it to be true, both pieces of it have to be true, and therefore Larry has to laugh. But the disjunction one requires only that one or the other pieces be true, and so it can be true when Bob bakes and Larry doesn't laugh, and so they don't say the same thing. They're different thoughts. Well, grammatical ambiguity there are lots of benefits. Natural language is very flexible, but it has some costs. That benefit has the cost of grammatical ambiguity. Our logical language is a bit more rigid than natural language, but it has the benefit that it's not grammatically ambiguous, and that's nice. It means that, among other things, we can apply our inference rules to sentences without knowing. We don't need to know what the person who wrote them down meant by them. We can look just at the sentence. I know what that sentence means. I don't need to ask when that person said enraged cow injures farmer with axe, what were they thinking? Which idea did they mean to express? I can just look at the sentence and I know for logical sentences. So that's nice. And we use the parentheses to avoid the ambiguity. So for example, here are these two sentences, parenthesis negation P arrow Q versus negation of parenthesis P arrow Q. The first says one thing. In the first, the negation is in one place. It's inside the conditional, in the antecedent on the negation, or on the P, and we know that because look, the negation is inside of the parentheses. Whereas in the second, the first is a conditional with whose antecedent is a negation, whereas the second is not a conditional. It's the negation of the conditional. It says truly or false, whether or not it's true or not, it says that a certain conditional is false. So those say different things, and the reason why, and we can know that they say different things. We know that each one of them says only one thing. The first is a conditional, period. The second is the negation of a conditional, period. And so they're different. And it's because the parentheses are there that we know that one says the one thing and one says the other. So the parentheses are used in our language to make sure that our language is not grammatically ambiguous. And if we didn't have the parentheses, if we just wrote negation P, error Q, and we didn't have parentheses in our language at all, we wouldn't know, is that a conditional whose antecedent is negated, or the negation of a conditional? Which thought is being expressed? Don't know. But with the parentheses, we can always be sure. Even if we're not immediately sure, we can figure it out. We'll talk more about how to figure it out, but we can always figure it out. However, having to write parentheses all the time is a pain, and so we're going to have a distinction between what we call official notation and informal notation. So with informal notation, so official notation is just following the rules. A sentence is in official notation if it follows the rules of the language that we laid out in the previous video. All sentence letters are sentences. If you have a sentence and put a negation on the front, you have a new sentence. If you have two sentences, you can put an arrow in between them and parentheses around the whole thing, and you have a new sentence, and that's it. That's official notation. In informal notation, we drop parentheses where we don't need them. So here, for example, P or Q is not a sentence in official notation, but it is a sentence in informal notation. We've just dropped those external parentheses. So the rule, we have a very simple rule for dropping parentheses, which is once you're done building the sentence, if there are parentheses around the whole thing, drop them, you don't need them. So here, if you build up the sentence, if you say take P and then put a negation on the front and then take Q and put an arrow in between them and put parentheses around the whole thing and then stop, then you can drop them. And so if you find a sentence where parentheses are missing, you know, oh, the only way those parentheses could have been dropped is if they were dropped after the whole sentence was built up, and so to put them back on, I just put them around the whole thing. And that's why then for the first part of a course, we haven't been worrying about parentheses, because we didn't, in all the cases that we were looking at, we didn't need them to tell which thought was being expressed by the sentence, which sentence was really meant. Now we have this, we have our 4 official rules, and then we also have this another rule that says, hey, look, once you're done building your sentence, if your sentence has parentheses around the whole thing, and so if your sentence is a conditional, you can drop them. And so that's what you need to know about informal notation. We have official and informal. Official is following just the 4 rules. Informal is you followed the 4 rules and then you're done and your sentence was surrounded by parentheses and so you dropped them. And then your sentence, this new thing, is in informal notation. So that's how we deal with parentheses or not.